Hello, I'm Pete Hendrickson. In 2003, I wrote a book called Cracking the Code, The Fascinating Truth About Taxation in America. It's about the income tax mostly, focusing on three different aspects of that tax. The first part of Cracking the Code concerns itself with what it is that actually qualifies as the income that is taxed under the law. The fact is, income under the law doesn't mean money or earnings or receipts. Although in everyday language we use the word income to mean all that comes in, under the tax law, income is a legal term with a much more narrow meaning. Very simply put, income under the tax law means gainful activity involving the federal government, either as a federal office holder, a federal worker, an investor in federal entities, or as a recipient of federal benefits. The activity is what is actually taxed, but the amount of that activity is measured by the resulting gain. Thus, the language of the law generally adopts the convenient shorthand of referring to that particular variety of gain, which is generally denominated in dollars, as itself being the income taxed under the law. This is one of the primary reasons for people confusing the meaning of income in the income tax with money. When it appears that those subject to the tax are being taxed for receiving money, it is easy to make the mistake of concluding that everyone making money is thus subject to the tax. But this is not the case. The fact is, most people don't receive any income at all, or receive very little, as that term is meant in the law. Still, somehow we all get treated by the IRS and state and local tax agencies as though every penny we receive is income. The reason for that, and how to stop it, is the focus of the second part of Cracking the Code, in which the reader learns that due to a generations-old practice rooted in a common misunderstanding of the rather complicated body of law that has grown up around the income tax, virtually every payment made by one American to anyone else is accompanied by the creation of a legal document, technically known as an information return. You know these legal documents as W-2s, 1099s, and K-1s, mostly. These information returns are intended to be used only for reporting payments of income, not mere payments of money, and the laws dictating their use say so plainly. However, even just the condensed representation of the tax laws that we call the Internal Revenue Code is well over 3 million words long, and I believe I can safely say that practically no one issuing information returns has ever read all the laws associated with those documents. Indeed, very few have read any of those laws. Instead, most payers issue those documents for every payment made because they don't know the meaning and effect of what they are doing, and because they have been trained to do so by the IRS, which has a long history of presenting Americans with carefully selected excerpts of the law, intended to conceal both the legal effect of instruments such as information returns and the general limitations of the income tax. That this is done will surprise none but the most naive. After all, the mission of that agency, like that of all tax agencies, is to maximize revenue. Period. Further, under our legal system, the responsibility for knowing the legal effect of a tax-related instrument rests on the one signing that instrument, not on the tax agency, even when that agency has an incentive to mislead. Despite the fact that most information returns are created in ignorance of their import, they will nonetheless be taken by tax agencies as concrete evidence that the payment reported on them was a payment of income. That is, these information returns will be taken as deliberate testimony that the reported amount of money paid was paid as a consequence of the recipient engaging in a taxable activity. Tax agencies will vigorously attempt to frighten or fool those about whom these information returns are created into adopting that testimony on their own tax returns and accepting the resulting tax liabilities. Or the agencies will independently seek to collect money based on this information return testimony. You'd think there would be a law against creating false information returns, and in fact, there are several. The most important of these is the commandment, by which we are instructed to not bear false witness against our neighbor at any time or about anything. There are also a number of man-made laws specifically aimed at the creation of false information returns. I'm sorry to say that they are rarely enforced. This isn't surprising when you consider that the prosecutors work for the same branch of government as the tax agency that encourages widespread misunderstanding about these legal instruments and their effects, the consequences of which are the presumptions of tax liabilities which otherwise wouldn't exist, and a river of money flowing into the Treasury. Of course, the prosecutors have their excuses. For example, in order to punish someone for creating a false information return, there has to be a complaining victim, which is to say, someone who knows that the information returns created about him are false, and how they will work against his interests. Since the campaign to keep Americans in the dark about these things is so mature and effective, there have been very few victims filing complaints. This is not an excuse a lax prosecutor would probably be comfortable explaining to his mother, I suspect, unless his mother is Ma Barker. However, there is another, more honorable excuse available to a government prosecutor wanting to ease his conscience about standing by while false information returns flood the mail from January to April every year. Acknowledging the basic principle of due process, that all evidence is subject to rebuttal and correction, and that without an alternative the courts would be perpetually clogged with lawsuits and prosecutions, Congress has made statutory provisions by which Americans victimized by false information returns can fix the situation all on their own. Those provisions are also covered in the second part of Cracking the Code. Readers of Cracking the Code, The Fascinating Truth About Taxation in America, have been acting for some time now on their newfound understanding of what is really subject to the income tax, the meaning and effect of information returns, and the statutory provisions Congress has made for victims of false testimony. What you're about to see is a sampling of what that has meant to these good folks. As you view the following images, please understand that, although the subject is too large to be properly addressed in this short film, there is a reason why the income tax is limited in the way that it is, and why Congress has provided the corrective mechanisms in the law that I have mentioned. Very briefly put, it is because those who framed the Constitution intended for the people to retain direct personal control of their earnings and wealth. The founders made constitutional provisions to that effect, and the income tax fully conforms to those provisions and that purpose. It is only the carefully cultivated ignorance of the law's details that has allowed this truly benign and lawful tax to take on the characteristics of the voracious monster that most Americans imagine it to be today. This most important aspect of the income tax story is the focus of the third part of Cracking the Code. More on that must be left to the reading of the book. In the meantime, here is what can be accomplished by those who know the truth. Those who have not engaged in a taxable activity, or have not done so to the extent of gains beyond the statutory exemption amount, generally owe no income taxes for the relevant period, regardless of the amount of money earned. In such cases, knowledgeably acting to correct any erroneous information return allegations about one's earnings establishes that fact legally. In most cases in which money has been withheld or paid in, or is available as a credit from a previous year, knowledgeably correcting erroneous information return allegations and presenting an appropriate claim establishes legally that everything withheld or paid in is to be refunded. And I mean everything. Social Security and Medicare contributions included. What you're seeing right now are refunds secured by readers of Cracking the Code, thanks to corrections and claims submitted over the last 18 months or so. Some of these thoroughly educated Americans have secured as many as a dozen such refunds so far. Also displayed here are Treasury Department transcripts showing zero balances for readers' accounts, levy releases, garnished money reimbursements, notice of deficiency closing notices, and every other kind of beneficial consequence that can result from a complete knowledge of the Internal Revenue laws. The more than $1 million in recovered and retained property shown here has returned to, or remained in, the pockets of Americans from all walks of life, including teachers and truckers, doctors and lawyers, nurses, engineers, CPAs, students, etc. And what is displayed here is just the tip of the iceberg. Only a fraction of the readers of Cracking the Code who have recovered property withheld against the possibility of tax liabilities which did not actually exist have generously furnished me with images of their checks and other documents for posting, both here and on my website, losthorizons.com. Many more have reported their successes in knowledgeably invoking the law, but didn't think to scan the resulting checks and notices. Many more still have doubtless enjoyed similar successes, but not communicated the fact to me at all. There are, after all, many thousands of copies of Cracking the Code in circulation now. The book is currently in its 6th printing. Copies can be found in libraries around the country. Cracking the Code is even being read in Australia, Eastern Europe, Canada, and Japan. LostHorizons.com logs more than 1.2 million Cracking the Code related hits each and every month. The refunds you're viewing range in size from as much as $75,150 down to as little as $1, which actually began as a 70-cent claim, but was rounded up under the rules of the state tax agency to which it was submitted. That little check, and the many other very modest refunds on display here, illustrate a very important aspect of this whole subject, which is that those who act on their new knowledge of what the law really says and means, and why it says and means what it does, are not acting for the sake of the money. They are acting on behalf of the rule of law, and in the understanding that the framers of our federal Constitution expressly intended that the government they created not be provided with the kind of open spigot of revenue into the Treasury which general ignorance, or apathy, regarding the truth about the income tax represents. The framers laid down rules by which the federal government is perfectly capable of financing any expense, whether of necessity or frivolity, but only by means of politically accountable and politically responsive processes. These processes include apportioned direct taxes, suitable and historically called upon for the financing of rare calamitous expenditures, such as become necessary as a consequence of war or natural disasters, as well as revenue tariffs and similar excises for the financing of routine, ongoing federal operations. On the other hand, income taxation in the manner that has become the current reality for Americans who remain ignorant of the relevant law's details was specifically prohibited by the framers, and remains constitutionally prohibited to this day. Readers of Cracking the Code act out of respect for the framers' intentions, to uphold the basic principle that property belongs to he who creates or earns it, and to enforce the simple fact that, under our system of government, and any proper system of government, the people are not subjects to be tapped for revenue at the government's pleasure, with only a choice of rulers every now and then. It will come as no surprise to you, having seen what you have seen, and having learned what you have learned watching this film so far, that the IRS has been vigorously trying to suppress Cracking the Code, and to discourage those who read the book from acting on their new knowledge, since the very moment the book first became available in August of 2003. Repeated efforts to have the book ordered off the market by federal judges have been defeated already, but that hasn't discouraged the tax agency, which recognizes what this book means to its long-standing control over a huge percentage of the earnings and wealth of most Americans. Even now, and even while quietly continuing to issue refunds and otherwise honor the filings of Cracking the Code readers every week year-round, The IRS is engaged in a massive public relations blitz attacking the book and me personally. In fact, the agency has gone so far as to launch a highly publicized, but utterly bizarre, lawsuit against my wife and me, in which it is arguing that refunds made to us for 2002 and 2003 were issued in error, and the agency wants our money back in its hands, despite the fact that the official Department of Treasury certificates of assessment for those years declare that no tax was, or is, due. That this lawsuit is no more than a publicity stunt is further emphasized by the fact that the IRS and state and local tax agencies continue to make precisely the same kind of refunds to Americans all across the country, day in and day out, without interruption. Details about these turn-back-the-tide efforts to preserve the ignorance of the law by which the agency, and its clients, have benefited so handsomely for decades now, can be found at losthorizons.com. I'm going to close this film with a few comments by readers of Cracking the Code, whose ranks I hope you'll choose to join. I especially hope that, after you read the book, you'll also choose to join us in standing up for the rule of law, by insisting that your servant governments abandon their long-standing efforts to encourage and exploit ignorance about the true nature of the income tax. Thank you for your time.
Come to the conclusion around the year 2000 that I was sick and tired of volunteering to give up my hard-earned money to people or to the government that they weren't entitled to. Eventually, I came across Pete's book. I've learned that by correcting those information forms and correcting the records, in most cases, you don't have to volunteer to pay the government any more than what's rightfully theirs, and you can keep what's rightfully yours. That's what CTC means to me.
Actually, it was my brother, a Catholic priest, who got me in on this. Anyway, I realized I'd always suspected something was wrong with the law, but I just never knew what. And it wasn't until, Pete, I read your chapter on includes and including about 50 times before it finally sunk in. I'm becoming a pro se attorney the next year or two, and this is going to be my specialty. And it's all to you, Pete. I thank you so much for everything you've done and for pointing this stuff out. It really has brought a totally new law and understanding and light to my mind about how to read the law.
Pete, I came across your book. It had to be probably 2 years ago, and I don't know. I honestly do not remember how I came across it, but I am so thankful I did. Spent probably 6 or 7 months reading it and rereading it, and I must have read it 6 or 7 times at least before I even attempted to do anything, and it was all good. Little background: I'm a partner with 3 other gentlemen in a fish processing plant in New Bedford, Mass. And I have been involved in a lot of governmental things for the running of the boats and the fishing areas that we're in, and just a lot of governmental control over our business. And after reading your book, I progressed to, I filed 3 years of amended returns for 2005, 6, and 7. I was, I believe, the first CTC follower or reader that received a refund from the state of Rhode Island for last year's taxes in 2007. I read the book. The first website that I visit in the morning is losthorizons.com, just to get myself up to date with what's going on with everything.
As far as CTC, I had been an advocate of the fair tax plan before, for probably in 2007, did a lot of research on that, read through their figures and analysis and all kinds of stuff, and I kind of like the idea of, something doesn't seem quite right, or it seems like oppressive taxation, or something's not right. But I hadn't really read much. I hadn't really read the Constitution or the Revenue Acts or Supreme Court rulings or all kinds of stuff like that. So actually, after I had a car accident in January of '08, and I was on YouTube, I think, and I was commenting on someone's post, and one of the posters said he had secured a refund of everything withheld, and that to something about learning about the true nature of the tax and stuff. So I thought, oh, why not? And it came to Lost Horizons and got the book and read it a number of times, and '07 was the first filing knowledgeably actually of what's going on. I can honestly say, you know, part of the motivation is to get a refund back of our own property, but also as I learn more, it kind of, a lot of different thoughts run through your mind, but it kind of makes you angry. I mean, I feel like, you know, injustice is being done under fraudulent pretense, and people are being robbed. Families, I mean, we talk about economic stimulus. How much if people had their own property back could they give to charity? They could help the elderly, the sick, their families get out of debt, and even be more empowered as citizens and not have their money just wasted. Of course, it's such a terrible secret, or and plus a good fundraiser, right? There's no way they're gonna just get up and say a national TV announcement and say, by the way, you know, most people don't owe income tax if they didn't, you know, engage in taxable activity.
I began to realize that if somebody didn't stand up for these things, it easily could be, all the information and knowledge could be lost in only one generation, because the government could easily, you know, obviously they're not teaching this in school, and they're doing everything they can, as the last newsletter from Pete stated, that no matter what you say, they twist what you say. So my concern is, you know, have we entered a time similar to what our forefathers faced when the government no longer followed the rule of law, and they were faced with the decision as to what they were going to do. My concern is, have we entered that time now ourselves?
From 1980 to 1997, I was a police officer, and I experienced an IRS agent coming out to take a person's car. And since that time, I thought to myself, you know, this is not America. I'm a police officer to protect the public and the Constitution. I took an oath and stuff. So by the time after that, I had several cases of running IRS agents off people's property, studied the Constitution and more. But I said to myself, you know, this is not America. They have the free and home of the brave. So since that time, and thank God for Pete Hendricks and his information, now I've come to the round circle and putting two together and make it a solid four. And so I devoted the rest of my life to fighting this stuff for freedom in the American way. Basically, that's my story, and thank God for Pete Hendrickson.
I always had an instinctive feeling that something was really wrong about the IRS. Just, I don't even know where that came from. When the 9/11 happened, I got much more deeply into kind of government corruption and these kinds of things, and the whole tax scam was a big part of that. And then I think it was, let's see, what are we, 2009 now? I think sometime in 2005 I was listening to Jeff Rentz's show, and some guy on there, I don't even know what they were talking about, threw out your name and the book and the website, and I went and looked at it and bought your book right away, and I read it, and you know, it was almost like too good to be true. And I loved it. And it took me, reading it 3 times, it took me probably like 2 years before I got the guts up to actually do my filing. And I did 2006, I think was the first year that I filed. And I waited the 6 months, and I waited to see my transcript, and it showed 0. You know, I'm also from Michigan too, and I think there's something about that Wolverine energy that has that fighting spirit in there, and I just, you know, I just stand up for the truth, and it really, it hurts me and it angers me to know that this is such a scam and such a ripoff, and people have been lied to their entire lives and gone through, you know, tremendous amounts of pain and suffering, and all of the stuff that goes along with filing taxes, and all the energy they go into, and the theft. It just makes me crazy. So I'm just telling everybody I can, the learning part of it is fascinating, and once you get it, and once you start to realize how they've manipulated things and how they set things up in that way, it's just so freeing.
I came to CTC in 2004 by meeting someone who was already a CTC warrior from another state that I was living in at the time. And I'm very grateful to him for helping me understand and turning me on to the book. I'm in my third reading. It has changed my life. I think the main impetus for me was because I have a son, and like a lot of other people who are in CTC, it's one thing for me to deal with a system that doesn't work, to put it mildly. It's another to bequeath that to the next generation because we were too lazy or too afraid to stand up for what's right. And I realized that I couldn't bequeath that to my son. And that's why I do what I do. I'm now really very, very interested in pursuing this for as long as it takes and helping others to see that this is the right path as well. This is the legal path, this is the just path, and this is the only path that we can take if we want to take ownership again of our country. And that's my goal. Every day I wake to that goal, and every day I go to bed to that goal.
I don't consider myself a warrior or a hero of any sort. I've like some of the others. For a long time I've felt like there was just something not right about the Internal Revenue Service, about the income tax and so forth. And I did a rather radical thing. I actually bought a copy of the Constitution, and I read it, and as it turns out, it's a fairly easy read. And the more I read it, the more I realized that, yeah, there was something definitely wrong, not right here. So I began to do some studying and looking. The more I learned, the more I realized that I didn't know. And then I don't remember how, but I came across your book, Pete. CTC stands for Cracking the Code. And all of a sudden, all of the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Everything that I had learned through my own reading and research and so forth. And again, you have to realize that I'm a family man. I've got to earn a living. And so, the time that I could devote to all of this reading and research was rather limited. And I was at that point faced with the truth, and as a result, I had to make a decision. And the decision was, do I keep my head, down? Do I stay below the radar? Do I wimp out? Or do I stand up for the rule of law? And I thought, well, doggone it, that really wasn't a decision. And so I have to stand up for the rule of law. Pete, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. I read some, I worked in government as a civilian afterward, and so I know what goes on in government, and I know that government will do anything it thinks it can get away with, and that it will overstep its boundaries if it thinks it can get away with it. I know that. I've seen all of that. And so I just decided that I have to stand up for the rule of law, and I'll be doggone if I'm going to let Big Brother take what's mine without a fight.
Isn't it appropriate, the cover image on Pete's book of the warrior with the sword? Because the sword of truth is powerful eternally. And the pen in this lifetime will be the real creator of the revolution. Everyone here is a warrior, whether you recognize yourself as one or not. And everyone who's alive in these times is a hero and is a warrior, because these are the times when the fork is in the road and people will make the right choice towards the light and towards the truth.
Hi everybody, my name is Eric Siegelstrom. Back in 2004, my wife and I discovered the fascinating truth about the income tax at losthorizons.com. After discovering this new information, we, for the first time in our lives, filed an accurate, knowledgeable return in 2005, and the government's response was a complete refund of everything paid in quarterly installments, including Social Security tax, self-employment tax, etc. All subsequent years, our money has remained where it belongs, in our possession. One quick thing I want to add to anybody whose first reaction is fear when thinking of the IRS: this is not only safe, it just happens to be the law. Go there now, check it out for yourself. This is beyond important. Every American needs to visit this site, understand what's there, implement it, and lead a better life.